Welcome back everyone to more from the Sableyes. Something a little bit different today. It's Charizard Explained. You might have noticed that on Pokemon TCG Live, you have a free Charizard EX deck that is good enough to jump straight onto the ladder. So what I thought I would do is I'd talk through why this deck is so strong, some strategies to help you when you are playing the deck for the first time, some different variants that other highly qualified players have built using the same concept to success in regional or international tournaments, as well as some discussion about matchups and the types of things that you should expect in different games. The very end of the video, I'll give you a list that you might be able to use to upgrade your Charizard EX deck on Pokemon TCG Live. If you just want to jump straight into playing, it's down in the description. Copy it in there. Whilst you're there, leave a like, subscribe, do all that good stuff. Let's explain exactly why Charizard EX is so good. Now, this list is the one that we are given as a baseline on Pokemon TCG Live. It has 3 copies of Charizard EX in a 4-2-3 line. It also has a 2-2-2 line of Pidgeot EX. It has a Radiant Charizard, a Moltres, and a Manaphy for all the Pokemon, then a whole bunch of interesting cards to try and get those Pokemon in play. But before we talk through those different counts and the way that different players have manipulated them, let's explain just why those cards are actually that good. The first card is obviously Charizard EX. It's a 330 HP Stage 2 Pokemon. That's a lot of HP. 330 is one of the highest in the game at the moment. It's weak to Grass, and it has 2 retreat costs. So there's not many things that are going to be able to knock this out in one hit. This Pokemon's going to be able to tank a little bit before it gets knocked out. It also has 2 important pieces of text. Its ability, Infernal Rain, means that when you play this Pokemon from your hand into the field of play, either by evolving Charmeleon or by using Rare Candy, we get to search our deck for 3 Fire Energy, up to 3 Fire Energy, and attach them to our Pokemon in any way that we like. Now, most of the time we'll be using this ability to power up our Charizard EX, but sometimes we can use it to power up other Pokemon, maybe that Moltres that we were looking at before, maybe Radiant Charizard as an option too. Now, we were saying we're going to put some energy onto this Charizard because it has a very, very strong attack. For 2 Fire Energy, it has the attack Burning Darkness, which deals 180 damage plus 30 more damage for every prize card that your opponent has taken during the game. Now, this means in the early game, you're going to be dealing 180, which will do lots of damage to your opponent's side of the field, could potentially knock out some basic Pokemon V or EX, depending on what type of Pokemon they are. We're talking like Squawkabilly or even Lumineon V. But as the game goes on, Charizard gets more and more powerful, to the point where if your opponent has taken 5 prize cards, Charizard EX is going to be dealing 330 damage. Now, we mentioned that's the amount of HP that a Charizard EX has, and not many Pokemon can take that kind of hit. So 330 damage from a Charizard EX will usually be enough to win you the game. The tricky part's going to be to keep these evolutions coming, so we're going to have some support Pokemon in this deck, specifically Pidgeot EX. Now, this card is a super good Stage 2 EX Pokemon. It has 280 HP, so not quite as much as Charizard. It's weak to Lightning type, but it has free retreat, which means that you can put this in the active whenever you want and retreat out of it for free, which is really fantastic. That's not the best text on the card though. The best thing is its ability Quick Search. Quick Search means that you get to look in your deck once per turn and pick out any card that you want, put it into your hand, shuffle your deck. Any card you like. This can be super useful to find rare candies or other Charizard EX pieces to try and keep yourself attacking. Now, the only drawback is we can only use 1 Quick Search ability per turn, but we're only ever realistically going to need to do it once, because every turn picking the exact card is going to be enough to give us lots of strength, lots of consistency, and lots of power for our Charizard EX to take some big knockouts. We also have a little bit of a combo-based strategy in our base deck here that's powered by a supporter card called Arven. Arven lets you search your deck when you play this supporter card to find 1 item and 1 tool card and put them both into your hand. This is a fantastic ability in this deck because it searches out two of the things that you will desperately need throughout the game. In the early turns, it'll search out cards like Buddy Poffin. Buddy Poffin lets you search for two Pokemon with 90 HP or less. I believe it's 90 HP. Now I'm forgetting. Low HP, I think it's 70 HP. I should really read the card, shouldn't I? Oh, I'm fumbling. I'll edit this out. It will let you find basic Pokemon like Charmander or Pidgey and put them onto your bench. You can also find Technical Machine Evolution with Arven, which will allow you to, as an attack, use the Evolution attack, which will evolve two Pokemon on your bench to the next stage up. So let's just say you have a Charmander in the active with 1 energy on it. You use a Buddy Poffin to find another Charmander and a Pidgey. You can then attack with the Technical Machine Evolution tool to evolve those benched Pokemon into their stage 1 forms. That's good for 2 reasons. Number 1, it means that those Pokemon are going to have some extra HP and are going to be a little bit stronger in the game, but also next turn you can evolve them again and get into Charizard EX and Pidgeot EX straight away. Now, if you don't use Technical Machine Evolution, Arven will also help you find Rare Candy, which is also very, very useful. Gets those Charmanders into Charizard EX very quickly, and also gets into your Pidgeot EX as well. So another card that in the mid to late game you might be looking for with your Arven instead of that Buddy Poffin. So that list is obviously very, very good. There's a couple of other cards in here that are super strong as well. Feel free to take a read of them. But ultimately, this list has got a couple of differences to the lists that really top players have decided to make. So what I've got for you are 3 different variants that top players from around the world have played with. We can talk through the reasons why they've made the changes that they've made and why you might choose to make those changes as well. Now, our first variant that we're going to look at is the list that Tord Reklev used at the European International Championships in 2024. He used this to win the tournament. So a very, very strong deck, piloted by a very, very strong player. You'll notice that the deck is pretty similar. It's got a 4-1-3 Charizard line. Now, the Charmanders are different, but it doesn't really make too much of a difference. It's got a 2-2 Pidgeot line. It's also got a couple of extra Pokemon that we haven't spoken about before. Namely, we have Rotom V, Bibarel, and Cleffa. The reasons Tord has put these cards into his list is because he needs more consistency in the early game. One of the big weaknesses of Charizard is not finding the pieces that you need quick enough, and so Rotom and Cleffa both give you an opportunity to draw extra cards to try and help you get into your Charizards and Pidgeots soon. Rotom V has the instant charge ability, which means that you can use the ability to draw 3 cards and end your turn. Doesn't seem super good, but when you're only missing 1 piece in that combo, it can be enough to get you across the line. Cleffa also has the attack Grasping Draw. You'll notice there that it does not have any energy cost associated with it. It's a free attack, which means that if you go second, you can attack with Grasping Draw and draw until you have 7 cards in your hand. Also has free retreat, which is super handy. And then we've also got a 1-1 Bibarel line in that list to try and make those mid and late game turns just a little bit smoother. Your opponent's probably going to try and use cards like Roxanne or Iono to slow you down. Bibarel will ensure you against those particular cards and help you find the cards that you might need to be successful in the late game. But Tord also had quite a few power cards in his list as well. It wasn't all consistency. He played a copy of Forest Sealstone, which is another tool that you can search with Arven. Allows you to use the ability Star Alchemy when it's attached to a Pokemon V. Gives you a V-Star power in a deck that doesn't already have one. Star Alchemy lets you search for any card that you like, very similar to Pidgeot, and then you get to put it into your hand. It's as simple as that. A very, very powerful effect. And since you're playing Vs with Rotom and Lumineon, which you also played, then you can get those particular... you can get the Forest Sealstone to work quite easily. He also played an A-Spec card, which our base deck doesn't play. In his instance, he played Prime Catcher, which essentially uses its effect to bring one of your opponent's benched Pokemon into the active, just as Boss's Orders might, but it also allows you to switch into one as well. So you can switch into a benched Pokemon like Pidgeot or Cleffa, retreat for free into the attacker that you want to use, and then knock out the Pokemon that you have targeted. A very, very good card, and if you've not played with it before, you should definitely consider it. One final power card that he's included is Professor Churo's Scenario. I was mentioning before that Charizard EX is very, very bulky and difficult for your opponent to knock out. Sometimes your opponent will have to hit into it once before finally taking a knockout the next turn. Professor Churo allows you to put one of your Pokemon in play into your hand and discard all the cards attached to it. That means if your opponent has attacked into a Charizard once, you can play Professor Churo's Scenario, pick up that Charizard, remove all of the damage from it, and then potentially evolve into a new one that you've got prepared on the bench. A super, super powerful card that you can definitely use to your advantage in this particular list. In saying that though, we don't need to play Toad's list, we might choose to play a different variant. This one here is from Jordan Palmer and his second place finish in Perth Regionals. You'll notice a lot of the same kinds of ideas going on here, but there are a few different bits and bobs that this deck plays that make it both a little bit more aggressive and a little bit more defensive at the same time. These cards on the screen are cards that Jordan's list played that Toad's list didn't. 2 tools and a supporter, and I'd like to say that these cards are about disrupting your opponent. That ace spec in the middle, Hero's Cape, gives your Pokemon an extra 100 HP. We were saying that Prime Catcher is a very powerful ace spec card, so too is Hero's Cape, because if you attach it to a Charizard EX, it goes from having 330 HP to 430, which is effectively impossible to knock out. There are not many Pokemon in the game that can reach that number, and maybe having a Hero's Cape on your Charizard will spare it for a turn when without it, it might have been knocked out. Similarly, we want to try and disrupt our opponent's Pokemon in a couple of other ways. There's lots of Pokemon in the format at the moment that require evolution, so rather than using TM Evolution, Jordan's chosen to use Technical Machine Devolution. It essentially states that when you have that tool attached to the Pokemon, you can use that attack, 1 energy, Devolution, devolve each of the Pokemon on your opponent's side of the field by 1 stage. That doesn't seem super great, but lots of Charizard decks are not playing lots of Charmeleon. You'll notice that decks like Chenpao are not playing any Arctobacs in their Baxcalibur lines. Lots of people are trying to evolve using Rare Candy, and if you play Devolution and devolve all of your opponent's Pokemon, it could just be that they can't get back into those stage 2s that they need to get a big knockout on your Charizard. In saying that, we can also disrupt our opponent's Pokemon just that little bit more by playing the supporter Airy. They're usually really, really good in combination because Airy will look at your opponent's hand and discard 2 trainer item cards that you find there. Now you'll notice Rare Candy is an item card, so if you are able to find some items in your opponent's hand, maybe you can discard those Rare Candies and combine that with a Technical Machine Devolution and potentially stop your opponent from ever attacking again. It's a little bit more of an advanced technique, but definitely one that you could include in your Charizard EX list if you were interested in doing so, because it will definitely give you an edge, especially against other evolving decks. But that particular list also had a couple of extra cards to make attacking just that little bit easier. I've popped Radiant Charizard up on the screen here, not because it's unique to Jordan's list, in fact it's in all of the lists that we've looked at so far. It's a very, very strong attack. It's 1 fire and 4 colorless, Combustion Blast, 250 damage, you can't attack with Combustion Blast next turn. That seems really quite bad, because 5 energy is a lot, but the ability, Excited Heart, means that every prize that your opponent takes reduces this attack cost by 1 colorless energy. That means after taking 4 prize cards, your opponent is giving you a 1 energy attack for 250 damage. We've also included Magma Basin and Double Turbo Energy in this list, not because we want to get energy onto our Charizard EX, but instead because it allows us to attack with Radiant Charizard just a little bit earlier. The Magma Basin means that you can attack with Radiant Charizard on when your opponent's taken 3 prizes, or potentially even 2 prizes, giving you a big attack that your Charizard EX might not be in a good place to take. And the Double Turbo Energy also means that in combination with the ability on Charizard EX, you can power up Radiant Charizard in a single turn. 3 energy from Charizard EX plus the double turbo energy fulfills the 5 energy requirement and means that your Radiant Charizard can attack as early as turn 2 if you're exceptionally lucky. Now you might say, why is that important? Charizard EX can attack for just as much. Well, really, in the early game it can't, and 230 damage can take knockouts on EX Pokemon like Iron Hands, Chien-Pao, and Golden Go, as well with weakness, in early stages of a game to try and push your advantage that other decks might not be able to do. So potentially a good option. But in saying that, it's not the only way to go. We've got a Pidgeot version of the deck, but you might choose to forego Pidgeot altogether and instead choose to use Lo Win Soon's deck from his Singapore Regional League 2nd place. He's decided Pidgeot is not the way to go. Instead, I'm just going to stick with a 2-2 Bibarel line, and then that allows me to play some other really powerful cards to get me across the line. In particular, he obviously keeps that Technical Machine evolution because he wants to keep the evolving going, but he can attack with Entei V instead of another one prize Pokemon to get some damage in the early game. You can use that fleet-footed ability to draw an extra card, and you can also use the Cypher Maniac's code-breaking supporter to really have a very powerful turn in the middle of the game once Bibarel is in play. Cypher Maniac's code breaking states that you search your deck for 2 cards, shuffle your deck, and you put those 2 cards on top, which means that if your Bibarel is drawing 2 or more cards, you can guarantee exactly what you'll be drawing into. So a very powerful combination that continues to use that Technical Machine evolution attack. So in saying that, each of these 3 Charizard variants are going to have some good matchups, they're going to have some bad ones. There's no deck in the format that's perfect. You gotta choose the decks that you might like to beat. And I'll tell you right now, having played Charizard, there are a few matchups that feel pretty strong. In particular, these matchups on the screen are probably going to be easier or relatively easier for you to win. In particular, let's talk about Golden Go EX. Golden Go EX is super powerful. Its Make It Rain attack can very easily reach 330 damage and knock you out, but for every attack that they make, you are going to be able to take 2 prize cards. And if you can use Radiant Charizard at the right time, Golden Go should be a deck that you're able to beat. The big issue that Golden Go has is it can't attack with a Pokemon that doesn't give away 2 prize cards unless it uses something like Radiant Greninja, which not all Golden Go decks use. So definitely worth considering that Radiant Charizard's going to be the key here. Roaring Moon EX and other Ancient Box style decks also tend to have a relatively tough time into Charizard EX. Charizard can obviously deal massive amounts of damage, and it's going to be able to consistently take knockouts on ancient Pokemon in every turn. You might say, well, Roaring Moon EX actually can knock out a Charizard because it's got that frenzied gouging attack, which doesn't deal damage, it just knocks out a Pokemon, and you'd be 100% correct. But the biggest issue with that Roaring Moon is that it puts 200 damage counters on itself, which means that it only has 30 HP left. You might remember that Torda was playing 60 HP Charmanders instead of 70 HP Charmanders. He's doing that because that Charmander has an attack for 1 energy that deals 30 damage. So if you are playing those Charmanders, that Roaring Moon is going to be pretty easy for you to knock out. So definitely an easier matchup, although there are going to be variants of Roaring Moon and Ancient Box that are able to get knockouts, so definitely consider that that might not be the best, depending on what Charmanders you're playing, etc. Another deck at the moment that is really popular on the ladder that's a pretty good matchup for Charizard is Iron Hands EX and Future Box, Iron Crown EX, etc. Those cards are very, very easy for Charizard to knock out. Iron Crown particularly because it's weak to Dark type, which Charizard EX is. So there's going to be games where you can just gust 3 times, use Prime Catcher, use Boss, and take 3 knockouts for 6 prizes super easily. But the other thing that's worth noting about Iron Hands is 230 damage is not that hard for Charizard to do. We talked about the fact that Radiant Charizard can do it quite easily, so it could be possible for you to take knockouts on those Iron Hands, remove all of their energy from play, and take big knockouts to win that particular matchup. Definitely worth considering. I'd say that all 3 of these matchups are pretty winnable for Charizard EX. You are going to have a trickier time though into others, and these matchups here feel a little bit more difficult, especially if you've not specifically teched for them. Some of the different variants that we've seen, like Tord's Jirachi might be better into Giratina, for example, or Jordan's Hero's Cape might be better into Lugia, but all of these matchups are going to be a little bit tricky, especially if you have a baseline Charizard EX list. Chien-Pao EX is capable of dealing huge amounts of damage. It can power up a Chien-Pao that's capable of knocking out a Charizard with just 6 energy, which sounds like a lot, but it's actually not that many for Chien-Pao to get to. And it also has the ability to attack multiple times with Greninja. Radiant Greninja is such a powerful card that can potentially cause lots of drama for your evolving basics. So this matchup can go either way. It really depends on whether or not you're able to set up comfortably. If you can, and you're playing cards like TM Devolution or Eri or both, you might be able to snag a win that maybe wasn't otherwise possible by removing their Baxcaliburs from play and making it impossible for your opponent to power up their attackers. Not an auto loss by any stretch, but still a very tricky matchup. In saying that, Lost Zone Giratina is also a very tricky matchup. This deck plays a lot of cards that can knock out your evolving basics like Cramorant and Sableye, but also it can easily jump into a 2-prize race and beat you before you can deal 280 damage. So Lost Impact for Giratina deals 280. That will knock out a Pidgeot EX on your bench, so if they can gust it up, they'll be able to do that. They also have the Star Requiem attack, which will instantly knock out one of your Pokemon, even a Charizard EX, and it also tends to play a copy of Iron Leaves, which doesn't sound that threatening, but being a grass-type Pokemon that has an attack that deals 180 damage, double that for Charizard and it will knock you out. So you need to be careful to manage all these different ways that Giratina could potentially get the win. And finally, another matchup that might be a little bit tricky, Lugia V-Star. This one's a bit of a casino. You never know what you're going to get with Lugia V-Star. But if it is able to set up 2 Archeops and set a whole bunch of energy in play at once, it can be tricky for you to beat. Not because the Archeops are hard to knock out or because Lugia is particularly powerful, but because of the Pokemon Chinchino, which is worth 1 prize and deals 70 damage for every special energy attached to it. That means that Chinchino will be able to knock out Charizard EX as early as turn 2 with 5 energy cards. It's not hard for them to get, and even if you are able to knock it out, you're taking 1 prize whilst your opponent will be taking 2. So it can be really tricky to navigate that matchup depending on what different variant you've chosen to play. In saying that, let's take a look at a list that I would recommend for you if you are starting out on your Charizard journey. It's not too much different to the list that we've been given for free, so you can make those changes or not. Maybe you want to use one of the lists that we've shown off earlier in the video, completely up to you. But let me talk through it and why I think it's a good place to start. So, we've got all of the basic Pokemon that we were talking about before. We've got Charizard, we've got Pidgeot. We've changed the counts a little bit, but ultimately you've still got evolving pieces for both of those lines. So TM Evolution is still going to be viable for you. We have put in for you though a 1-1 line of Bibarel. All of the lists that we've seen today have been playing Bibarel, and it's not for me to suggest that the players that have been successful with this are wrong. So let's put Bibarel in. We've got a 1-1 line. If you can use it, fantastic. If you can't, it doesn't matter. Bibarel will just be extra support for you throughout the game. We've also got these 2 V Pokemon here, Lumineon and Rotom. They're obviously not great in the sense that they're going to give up 2 prize cards, but they do give you a lot of extra consistency. Rotom gives you extra card draw in the early game, Lumineon helps you find supporters in the mid game, and both of them can have that Forest Sealstone attached to them so that you can search out any one card you like for free. So I think the power that they provide is super good, and you'll find them really useful, especially if you're finding it hard to get off the ground in the early game. We've also added in a copy of that Professor Churro's scenario for you. A bit of a tricky card to play, it's hard to know exactly when to use it, but if you get the hang of it and can use it to pick up damaged Charizards from play, then you will do way better than just the base Charizard list, because you're going to be able to offset your opponent's attacks a little bit. Make him attack twice more to take a knockout into your Charizard whilst you attack for knockout. We've also also chosen Prime Catcher as our ace spec of choice. It might be a little more expensive for you considering it is an ace spec, but they're free on the ladder as of the recording of this video, so you can definitely get them in your battle pass. Otherwise, they're relatively inexpensive, and every deck that you play that's competitive will use them. You could pick up Hero's Cape if you want, but I think that this is a much easier card to use, and therefore probably better for someone who's just starting out. But if you want to experiment with Hero's Cape, you absolutely can as well. We've also put in a copy of Counter Catcher here. We haven't really talked about this card, but it is particularly useful for Charizard. Counter Catcher means that when you're behind on prizes, you can play that item to bring one of your opponent's benched Pokemon into the active. That's super strong, and because we're usually going behind in games, it's probably going to be a very effective way of targeting specific Pokemon from your opponent's bench. We've also chosen to go with the Magma Basin Stadium, just to give you a little bit of extra support with your energy. We don't have the double turbo energy like Jordan's list, but it will mean that you can at least get energy back from your discard pile, because sometimes you can find that with Ultra Balls or with knockouts that you weren't expecting, sometimes more energy end up in the discard pile than you would like. So definitely a good way to mitigate that loss. You can obviously replace that with a Collapsed Stadium, which lots of other Charizard lists are playing at the moment. That's a little bit more tricky to use, but it is going to be able to get rid of those two prize liabilities like Rotom or Lumineon if they stay in play. But for me, I think that Magma Basin's a perfectly fine stadium for this list, and will be able to get you attacks that other people are not expecting, particularly from that Radiant Charizard. We've cut down on the energy from the base list to 7 instead of 10. It's because we've got that Magma Basin, but also because you usually won't need that many. We do have 2 copies of Super Rod as well, so we can always put those energies back in, but generally you'll find that 7 should be more than enough. So that is Charizard EX, a very strong deck that you've been given for free on Pokemon TCG Live. Hopefully the upgrade that you can make to that deck will give you a chance to boost yourself all the way up to Arceus tier. I'm confident that it will be able to do that for you. It is by far one of the best decks in the format at the moment, so definitely give it a try. If you've liked this video and want to see more similar kinds of content, there are obviously lots of decks that we can upgrade that come out regularly on Pokemon TCG Live, so please leave a comment, leave a like if you haven't already, all that good stuff. Otherwise, stick around on the channel every week. We're going to have at least one video from here on out, hopefully, as long as I don't fall apart again, but it's going to be fine. One video per week, so subscribe to stick around for that. Otherwise, thank you very much, everyone. I've been Mitch, thank you for watching, and I'll see you all next time for more from the Sableyes. Bye.